Okay, all good. Good evening, everybody. I would like to call to order meeting number 1539, regular council meeting for June 1st. And in honor of the Liwatul, the village of Pemberton acknowledges that we are meeting within the unceded territory of the Liwat Nation. And before we go further, I'd also like to acknowledge the absolutely horrific discovery in Kamloops this past week. 215 unidentified remains of children at the Kamloops Indian Residential School. You know, this level of atrocity seems unfathomable, and I tried to find some messaging and words for the last number of days, and I finally put a post out this morning trying to somehow acknowledge the horrors against Indigenous peoples here in our valley and in our province and in our country, and the grief and pain and level of suffering. And I put out a post. Basically, how I came up with was, I'm sorry, but I got a response that I'd like to share with you from somebody on Facebook. I'm just going to bring it up here. And I asked the person if it was okay if I shared it with you. It's on public Facebook, so it's public, but I just asked permission anyway, and I felt their words were quite valuable. Cookshun Kalip, we need, and this is from a Liwat Nations member, we need allies to help us spread awareness and help prevent this from happening again. We truly just need to be heard, understood, and validated. Most of us knew this happened as our families didn't come home, but it wasn't taken seriously by anyone. We are now validated with the proof. These babies were planted seeds taking root all these years to bloom today to tell the world, be better, do better, to act kinder to fellow human beings. As we mourn, please send prayers and be gentle, and that's all I ask. So with that, I'm going to ask us maybe to take a minute here for some silent reflection on that request before we move any further. So if we could take a moment of silence, please. Thank you. And before we get into it too, I mean, I've had a number of conversations with residents over the last few days, also try and find ways to somehow acknowledge the horrors. And I just want to share a couple quick conversations with you to see if potentially it might lead to some conversations that we would like to have in the days to come, or maybe even a little bit here tonight, later on if we like. But a couple of conversations were about any possible symbolic acknowledgements we could make here at the Village of Pemberton. A couple examples were perhaps requesting or setting up for 215 pairs of children's shoes at the barn and having that sort of acknowledgement. Another one was interesting conversation I had was, you know, how we consider Canada Day in a month and celebrate that and celebrate our nation and keep this thing in mind and how we can perhaps impact our Canada Day celebrations, as well as how we could look at, you know, turning some of our attention, maybe even some of our budget in terms of those celebrations towards other things like Aboriginal Day or Declaration Day, and how we could sort of be part of that a little bit more. But I just wanted to throw those thoughts out for council. If there's any considerations of perhaps some actions, some symbolic actions, certainly we would want to speak with members from the Liwat Nations to make sure that they are appropriate and desirable and appreciated. But yeah, I just wanted to pass that on to all of you. Okay. So, sorry, I'm just getting back to my notes. For those members of the public in attendance, please note that this meeting is a live webinar and is being recorded. A recording of the meeting will be available on the village's website following the meeting. Are there any amendments to the agenda? Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve the agenda? Councillor Noble, second by Councillor Zant. Any discussion? Opposed? Motion carries. Adoption of minutes from regular council meeting number 1538 from Tuesday, May 11th. Moved by Councillor Noble, second by Councillor Democratic. Any opposed? Motion carries. Any business arising? Seeing none, we have some rise and reports from the camera. Just give me a quick second. So at the in-camera meeting held earlier today, council determined to rise with a report on the following resolutions. The airport lease mobile home pad rental. So at in-camera meeting 1538 held on May 11th, council directed staff to negotiate a new rental lease agreement between the Village of Pemberton, the Village and Pemberton Crew Holdings for the mobile home pad at their airport for a period of 20 years. Council also supported the sublease of the mobile home pad to Blackcomb Helicopters for the purposes of crew housing. Staff will be posting notice of the disposition of lands via a lease. The next is the Board of Variance appointment at the in-camera meeting held earlier today. Oh, I don't have his name. Trevor Burton, right? At the in-camera meeting held earlier today, council appointed Trevor Burton to the Board of Variance. Mr. Burton will replace Drew Meredith, who has moved to Vancouver Island. And the last item to report on is that staff has been directed to bring back a report to look at amending the Village of Pemberton bursary policy for the bursary awarded to Pemberton secondary kids. Can I get a motion to that effect? Councillor Noble, second by Councillor Zant. Any opposed? Motion carries. No business arising from committee of the whole or committee minutes. So we're going to go to number 10. And we have a delegation. Mr. Troy Bacatti and Veronica Woodruff are going to be joining us. Good evening, Mr. Bacatti. Good evening, Ms. Woodruff. Thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you here, and we are eager to turn it over to you to hear about the Capricorn Creek Rehabilitation Project.
Yeah. Troy, do you maybe just want to give us a little intro while I get organized here?
So you all know that we all share concerns of the Capricorn slide and its effects on the Lolo River. And last fiscal, or before last fiscal, we applied for funding and it was carried on to this year to start a rehabilitation project. And pretty much Veronica's been doing all the legwork on this. And I'm concerned and happy about what we're doing, and hopefully it has impacts for the fish and wildlife. And also we have hopes that it will help out in our future flooding. We're some time behind on this project, so it's going to be a while to see the effects. But Veronica, would you take it over?
Absolutely. Thank you, Troy. Yeah, Troy and I connected in 2019 and about the landslide, and we'd both spent time up there, and I was working quite a bit up there before the slide happened. And he started telling me about his ideas to restore the landslide debris field, and that we should maybe look for funding to do that. And we got a grant from the Habitat Conservation Trust Fund, seed funding to develop a proposal. We actually applied for the whole project year one, and they said, you know what, refine this proposal and we'll give you some money to do that. And so this is what we've been working on since. And this is what we'd like to present to you today. And I know you all know the context of Meager, but I thought just in case, we'll do a quick, can you see my cursor? Maybe, yeah, perfect. So this is the before picture with this secondary peak collapsed. You can see it here below as well. And then in the right-hand pictures here, that secondary peak is completely collapsed and deposited 50 million cubic meters into the valley below. This is the before picture. You can see this is Meager Creek coming into the Lillooet River, quite an active drainage anyways, even before the Capricorn Creek slide. You can see there's quite a bit of disturbance happening. The Meager is a dormant volcano, and it's been described as a mountain made of ball bearings. Based on the last time it erupted 2,400 years ago was during a glaciation period, and it cooled very quickly. So this is a photo from 2011. And the landslide debris hasn't changed all that much. Much of it has moved into the lower valley, as you know, and is starting to really inundate the lower populated reaches of the Lillooet River, impacting our flood risk. So our proposed project is to create, I should change my view here. Our proposed project is to create corridors. This is quite a large area, 3.5 square kilometers of area that's been inundated by the slide debris. And it's very mineral material. You can see this is the after photo. This whole area is really what slid from the top to the bottom, although it did pick up some debris on the way. The majority of material deposited in the valley bottom was initiated from the top here. That's a helicopter for the scale. Okay. So this was taken 2 years ago. This is at the mouth of the Capricorn Creek and Meager. You can see there's a ton of mobile material sitting there that's actively moving and eroding into the downstream reaches through freshet and fall storms, winter avalanches, that kind of thing. And this is the material that we want to start shoring up. There are landscape scale processes that have been done through things like mining and reservoir reclamation work that we're modeling our project proposal on. Really what we want to do is this repairing ecosystem function. So creating these pockets of viable regeneration. So we will be doing some pocket planting. We'd be augmenting the soil with material that we can collect from, say, nearby forestry operations for new road building or some mine, and they could stockpile their topsoil. We could integrate that into our sites. Lots of machine manipulation. This kind of process has been done. Dave Polster is sort of a leader in this type of restoration. This is the Miller Creek slide. He has worked here locally and around the globe, and he's done some work on the Upper Lillooet in broad alder seeding. But this is the type of work that he does. So he uses bioengineering to secure disasters like landslides. And this is Miller Creek. Many years later, it's functioning still really, really well and really shored up that slope. This is the toe of the slope. That's Meager Mountain in the background. This was an area where we did some stream habitat, salmon habitat restoration, but you can see the banks where we've restored, the material, there is some planted material, but the majority is just seed capture from making the soil rough and loose. And this is all slide material. So I know that it can work. The challenge is finding the areas where it can work. This is from last summer in September. So you can see you have viable areas where you have some new seed growth happening. And these are the kinds of areas that we're going to concentrate on. And we'll, what has been done on this large scale is to test plots. So we'll set in a number of different test plots and see what works well before we expand to the whole site and spend all our money restoring. So this is going to require partnerships, and Government of Canada, we're looking, we've spoken to DFO, Emergency Management, our MP, and of course, part of that is engaging with local government. Pemberton, tonight we'll go to the SLRD as well. And we've been working actively with the Pemberton Valley Diking District because of their concerns about the flood risk about the mobile material. And finally, with the Ministry of, with FLNRO, through their regeneration specialists. So the people that come in and plant forest fires, they're really interested in working with us, as well as access through roads and all their wildlife conservation biologists, because this will have effects for grizzly bears, wolverines, moose, and other high priority wildlife. NRCan, through Government of Canada, it's doing quite a bit of research out at Meagher, as you know, and also Meagher as the site has really, it's such a interesting place that it's generated this interest from all around the globe. So there's a lot of interesting research work happening, and we're working quite a bit with SFU, Center for Natural Hazard Research. Quest University is involved with the geopark that's moving forward, which Meagher is a part of in the second phase. And most recently, in the last 10 days, BCIT has expressed extreme interest in making the site their living lab with their BSc students, their Bachelor of Science, their Masters of Ecological Restoration, and then all of their field diploma skills, which is really exciting. So we're going to follow up on those conversations, and of course our industry partners. We've reached out, we're casting a wide net here, making sure we contact all the right people. And of course, our community partners. So we have Stewardship Pemberton, Pemberton Wildlife Association, and some of the implications of this mobile slide debris increasing our flood risk. It's also an opportunity to engage some other organizations like first responder organizations, and of course, the community at large. So our strategy here is building our partnerships to see who can bring what to the table, and then applying for grants. So the next one coming up is an environmental damages fund. It's federal. And then we will go back to HCATS in the fall. And there's a number of other funds that are applicable to this site. So this is our process. We're really in just before stage one here. We're just getting our partnerships. We are required to do this habitat assessment to really understand what's happening on the ground there. It sounds like we have opportunities with BCIT. We're only really bound by money. So we could pay, if we can get enough money, we can pay people to do the assessment. It's much, much better if we can initiate these partnerships to create mutual benefits for students and community alike. So that's, we're really following that up. And then designing the restoration trials and start to implement them right away. So starting by next year, we really could start those this year if we were funded early enough. And then we'll look at the broader restoration in the following 5 years. So this is really a 10-year plan, and then monitoring to see what works and what doesn't. So what do I want from you as the Village of Pemberton? I have drafted a support letter here. I would like support in principle of this project. So the last two sentences in this letter I've drafted here: the Village of Pemberton supports Liyot Nation in their efforts to lead this ambitious project. And although the Capricorn Creek landslide is outside the Village of Pemberton's boundaries, its ongoing effects continue to have implications for the safety of our community. And of course, how it aligns with your economic, social, and environmental well-being within your community. So thank you. That is the slideshow, and we're happy to take some questions.
Thanks, Veronica. Thanks, Troy. That's exciting work. I mean, the potential there is there's a lot of win-win potentially. So I think it's really great. Are there other ways to, as partners, to be able to support this initiative beyond funding? Would be one quick question I have, and the other would be, with regards to funding opportunities that come up, is there a benefit to, or is there a place for us at the village to, amongst our other partners, to go out and advocate ahead of time and set that table for funding requests that are going to come? Would be my first two questions.
Yeah, those, that really, I mean, the Village of Pemberton, having Liyot leading the project, I think lends a lot of credibility to the project. And then we have these other government agencies like SLRD and VOP that can say, we do support this project. I think that gives, it's a lot of clout. I feel like that, the validity of the project and the initiative. And so that's really the intent. In terms of at this stage, I think that there's going to be quite a bit of interest in funding a project like this, especially if we can demonstrate all these partnerships. So really what we need from the village at this time is this support in principle. And as we get down the road to if very specific support letters, that if I've got mayor council blessing, I could perhaps go to staff and be like, okay, I need this letter, and it's already been approved by you folks. So.
I'll open it for questions. Councillor Craddock, and then Councillor Antonelli.
Thanks very much. Appreciate the report and the information. Veronica, in that last sentence, or the second last sentence, it says community. I'm wondering if it would be an idea to put in there in the unceded territory of the Little Red Nation and the village of Pemberton communities, so that we're expressly looking at everybody in the valley and not just our community alone.
Great point. Yeah.
Councillor Antonelli.
Yeah, it seems like a great project. I definitely support adding our support. And I do have a question though. Do we have any idea what the return period is on a slide of that size? So just to make sure that all of our good work isn't wiped out anytime soon.
It's a very risky site and there's no guarantees. And I have a large risk section, about that there's no guarantee that we will be able to maintain that. And that risk is only going to increase with glacier loss. However, if we can be strategic about where we're placing the real instabilities, the most vulnerable instabilities are on the northwest sides of that mountain. So I think it also comes down to the design. The other thing is we do have material now that's been deposited downstream of the slide debris that we can start looking at, seeing the success of what we do here and then moving it down into the lower valley, especially if we have academic partnerships that will take some of that assessment and design and implementation pieces over, the next decade. So yeah, no guarantees about Meager for sure, about the risk is there that it could get wiped out. And even, a big flood risk, you're going to have the channel's allowed to do what it does up there. So it just comes into the design of where you put your money, your trials. Anything to add, Troy?
I've participated with SFU and their studies of the area, and there is some risks that have been identified on more to the north, but it is the same general area. So they do expect a substantial amount of material to come down. They don't know whether it'll come down slowly or quickly or how it's going to happen, but of these reports and you may have read them yourselves. And but I think the greater risk is that we just watch what happens. Just like Mount Currie, if we thought we could do something about it, we would. But maybe here we can.
Exciting to hear BCIT has that level of interest, and that'll really help push the project along, I would imagine.
Mm-hmm.
I think, so I'm hearing general strong support from council in terms of supporting this project as a partner. Do we want to maybe, instead of just signing the letter as such, make a motion to write a letter similar to that what was brought to us today and have staff take it from there? A letter of support and principle. Would you like to make that motion? Councillor Noble, seconded by Councillor Zant. Any discussion on that?
Just one question.
Go ahead.
Or if I may ask, Ms. Woodruff, just curious, if we're writing this letter of support with the work that you would be doing up in that Meager, in that area, and further to Councillor Antonelli's comment about a reoccurrence of the slide, will this work actually assist in preventing a second slide?
No. And the short answer is no. I think if you have a robust enough, so maybe say in 40 years, we've got our 40-year-old trees that have survived and we made a beautiful corridor that's working for wolverines and grizzly bears, and it's got some resilience against a debris flow that'll come down to the front edge of it. And so, but yeah, the risks from slides there, it's just so large. The big instability that they're monitoring to the north, that wouldn't affect the site necessarily because it's above Keyhole. It's 10 times the size of Capricorn. It's moving 10 centimeters a month. It's enormous. So we can't stop that. You know, it's like holding the tide.
I still support the letter.
Great.
Even with those 10 centimeters.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm fearful as well.
Great.
Okay, so would somebody like to make the motion? Did we get that? We got the seconder. Did I call the question yet? I did. No, I didn't call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thanks to both of you very much for doing that work. And again, you know, Troy, Veronica, if moving forward, if there's any lobbying or advocacy or support we can give as a partner, I think it's a great project. So please let us know, and we'll do what we can. So thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all.
Okay. Let's give a moment to reset, and we're going to move on to the office of the CAO. All right, we good. So number 11, office of the CAO, verbal report.
I don't have anything for my verbal report this evening. Thank you.
Craziness. Okay, then we're on to 11A2, which is the 2020 Community Resiliency Projects for fuel treatment. Ms. Murphy, I believe, is joining us for this conversation. Good evening, Ms. Murphy. Thank you for joining us. If you're all settled in, we're happy to hear from you to talk about the community resiliency projects.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for your time. The purpose of the report is to update Council on the preparation of a revised application to the 2020 CRI Fire Smart Community Funding and Supports Committee, and to seek amendment of a resolution to submit the revised application with an updated fuel treatment plan and revised budget. It's been a couple of years since we submitted the initial application. So if you need a few details, you will find a map of the treatment area, which is 22.3 hectares in total, on page 15 of your agenda package.
Sorry, Ms. Murphy, can everybody else make sure you're on mute, please? There's some background noise going on. There we go.
Does anybody want me to go back a bit, or we're okay to carry on? Okay. Yes, so you'll find a map of the treatment area on page 15 of your agenda package. And this area is located behind the Creekside Strata on the hill behind the municipal building. The original fuel treatment prescription was developed in 2017, and the original application was submitted in 2019. Grant funding was awarded in 2020, but due to COVID-19, we were unable to begin the work. We're now in a position to undertake the work, and in consultation with local BC Wildfire Service representatives, we were advised that the prescription should be amended to be consistent with the 2020 BC Wildfire Service fuel management prescription guidance and industry best practice. So in April 2021, in an effort to inform our decision-making, the village engaged 2 forestry consultants to amend the prescription and provide a revised budget to address the full treatment area or as much as available within the approved existing budget. So our recommendation this evening is that the Village of Pemberton resubmits to the 2020 Fire Smart Community Funding and Supports Committee, seeking approval for the updated fuel treatment plan and revised budget.
Great, thank you so much. Ms. Murphy, do the revisions and the new guidelines result in added costs and ability to do less burn?
It's actually interesting. There is less large tree removal. So it actually, you're able to treat more of the area within only a slightly larger budget. So we're looking at only a $30,000 budget increase to address the full treatment area under the revised guidelines. But if we stick with the guidelines that were put forward in our existing application in 2019, our budget would be significantly constrained and we would only be able to treat a far smaller amount of the area, and we'd have to apply for further funding in later years.
Gotcha. Thank you. Questions from council? Councillor Craddock.
Yeah, thank you very much for the report, Ms. Murphy. It was well laid out. I just want to ask a question. It's been a couple of years since we started this process. Were there any local groups or organizations that you were in touch with to make sure that it fit within work they might have been doing in that area? And I'm thinking specifically of the Pemberton Wildlife Association.
Oh, I will defer to the CAO on this if she doesn't mind, please. Thank you, Councillor Craddock.
No, I'm happy to step in. Councillor Craddock, do you mean just in referring to with some concerns that they may have? Typically,
Yes.
no, we haven't. This is an area that we identified several years ago. I'm not sure of the process involved during consultation at that time, but we have not engaged with any local community groups.
Okay, I guess the only reason I bring that up, I know when we're going to do up in the Mackenzie Valley, the Pemberton Wildlife Association was very instrumental in setting up some feeding areas for wild stock up in there for deer and that type of thing. And we're somewhat concerned with the last treatment that was going on. So I just want to make sure that none of us on council get the phone call again saying, well, what's going on here this time? So just want to throw it out there that it might be worthwhile just to chat with them and let them know what's going on, if that's a reasonable thing to ask, Ms. Murphy.
I believe so. Yes, it is, Councillor Craddock.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Definitely, yeah, I agree. It shouldn't be an issue. I know that there's a deer winter habitat area on Mackenzie. I know there's a lot more sensitivities for wildlife in that area, but we have a good relationship with the Pemberton Wildlife Association, and I don't see any issue with having conversation with them at all.
Oh, that would be wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Questions? Would somebody like to make the motion as presented?
I'll make
The resubmission.
I'll make the motion.
Councillor Craddock, seconded by Councillor Noble. Further discussion? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you so much, Ms. Murphy, for your report.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we're on to 11B, Corporate and Legislative Services. Ms. Fraser will be presenting on the Lillooet River Park Crown land tenure application.
Have to unmute myself first. Thank you very much, Council, for having me tonight. The purpose of this report is to seek some council support in making application to cancel the village's tenure, which houses, is an area that housed the former wastewater treatment plant located at the north side of the Lillooet River Bridge within the Squamish-Lillooet Regional District. In February 1997, the village entered into a 30-year lease to accommodate the sewage treatment plant, which was located there. And that lease expires on March 2027. Subsequently, in 1999, to facilitate the outfall pipe that had to run from the plant to the river, a statutory right-of-way agreement was put in place. And for some reason, it was a 20-year lease as opposed to a 30-year lease, or it didn't align with the main tenure area. And I was not able to discern why that was the case. That right-of-way agreement expired in April in 2019. And we, at that point, started to look at that whole area and thought maybe there's an opportunity to renew that. We got our renewal request and thought about looking at renewing that and possibly changing the use for that area from utility to park or public use. However, as we moved through this process in discussions with staff at the province, we realized that the outfall statutory right-of-way was really of no use. It was underground and it didn't have any bearing on the other in the area as a whole. So subsequently, we abandoned that renewal request because it wouldn't have any bearing on the potential of changing the application from utility to public, and we wouldn't need that statutory right-of-way regardless. So on your report on page 16, we have the footprint of the area that allocated where the sewage treatment plant was located. And council may recall that when we moved the old treatment plant or the treatment plant out to the end of Airport Road, we went through a decommissioning process, and that area, in 2010, that whole treatment plant was removed. So, but the land remains, it was rehabilitated, and the land is just, it's open land, and the public do use it. We have looked at this area and over time considered expanding the area to establish a public park. And as a result of that, council may recall last summer, a proposal was presented to establish this new Crown tenure for community recreational purposes. And a referral was submitted to Lil'wat Nation, and we did receive a letter of support. The thought too at the time was to also look at possibly establishing or reestablishing the boat launch in that area. And because the boat launch, there had been a boat launch there, it got moved to the other side, and there's been discussion around the best location for that. Council did endorse these resolutions, and we submitted the application. But in discussions with Front Counter BC in March, what was raised for us was the whole issue of having to submit a complete proposal of what that area would look like and how it would be used. And that led us to talking to the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure that identified this is a great idea, but there is a 15-meter right-of-way off the road at the edge of the bridge. And they would need to look at what we were planning to do, and we would need to put in significant upgrades to the access area. And these would be at our cost, not the ministry's. And that would include a dedicated right turn lane, a merging lane for east-west of the driveway access, as well as reconfiguration of the driveway to allow safe entry and exit. And these would be significant, they would be significant costs. As well, we determined that we would need to have a comprehensive site plan that would identify the whole layout of the area, that would include parking, turnaround, and various other locations and the boat launch details. That in turn would lead to environmental studies that would need to be done. And all of this would have to be done in conjunction with the application, which would be in-house, but we wouldn't get approvals until all of this was completed. So one option is to leave this area undeveloped as a green space because there are some trails in that area. But as many of you may know, it has become a popular overnight camping location. And as a result, there's a lack of amenities, and this results in garbage, human waste, and fire risks in the area. We, the village, because it's understood by the neighbors in that area, that we have a small tenure on the lands. And so we frequently receive complaints from the neighbors and people who travel through that area to come and clean up the mess, to put in infrastructure, and more importantly, to monitor and provide bylaw enforcement to actively go out and talk to people and move them along as not to camp there. So through looking at all of this, this area is outside our jurisdiction. And so from an enforcement standpoint, we don't enforce in that area. We also have very limited resources and the capacity to monitor and enforce, even if it was decided that we would do that. And at this point, we are unable to facilitate that in any way, shape, or form. And then finally, if we were to take on responsibility, the public works would, the workload would increase considerably, and they don't have the resources to be able to accommodate that. So through all of that, staff is recommending that the village inform the province that it wishes to cancel the current Crown land lease effective immediately, and not pursue a recreational park or public use application. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them at this point.
Thank you, Ms. Fraser. Questions? Councillor Noble.
Just wondering if perhaps we could rejig the application, gate it off to traffic, since traffic seems to be the big issue there, and camping, and have it as a day use park area for people that use a Friendship Trail within an easy bike ride of town, and perhaps just put in a village garbage receptacle and maybe an outhouse to manage the other end of it.
Oh, we could certainly look at that. We would have to, and we would continue with our application for public use. We still have the issue of access. People would be driving off the highway to use it. I don't think that would stop people by putting a gate. Then there's also the budget allocation for supporting and doing operations and maintenance outside our jurisdiction that would need to be considered.
Go ahead, you can reply, Councillor Noble.
I was meaning like gating it off to the public so that it's only accessed by pedestrian, foot or bike traffic or boat traffic, but not from the highway,
Oh, okay.
as a
Yeah,
nice stopping spot on the Friendship Trail.
That could be considered. I mean, I think that could also just be considered as if we didn't have the tenure and it becomes Crown land, then Crown would facilitate that.
I have thoughts on that as well. Thank you, Councillor Noble. Go ahead, Councillor Craddock.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. And I think that's a good idea, but we have to be a little bit careful about closing it off for the fact that search and rescue use that to put their craft in the water. It's the only place they have access right now. So, I mean, other than making sure they have a key for the gate. The second thing is, if we don't close that area off, would it be ourselves or the regional district that could maybe put a no overnight camping sign up there? Because yes, it is a problem. I've gone there and cleaned up a number of times, and it's unfortunate the mess that's left behind. And I don't know how we're going to stop that, but maybe something as simple as a sign, preferably steel so they don't use it for firewood, would be a nice thing to consider.
We have put signage up and it just gets taken down. So
Yes,
Just to answer the question, the SLRD most likely could partner with FLNRO or whoever would be the applicable ministry there, just as they have with the no illegal dumping of garbage that they've done. You've seen on Green River Forest Service Road. I know the SLRD worked quite hand in hand with them. So that could be an initiative that the SLRD might want to undertake, or they might want to seek tenure of that area themselves for a recreational area. That could be a suggestion as well.
Good ideas. Thank you for that.
Councillor Antonelli and then Councillor Zant.
Yeah, I think this area is really important for residents of the village of Pemberton. I think the beach on 1 Mile gets really crowded in the summer, and I think we need, as the community grows, to look at other areas that have access to the water and give them the amenities that we need. I think closing off highway access is a great idea, except that I do know that it's used by a lot of people to launch their craft. All these things combined, and that it's not in our jurisdiction. I think what I would like to see is just to have this referred back to staff to take a look at all of our options. Maybe partnering with the SLRD and the Loa Nation, or having, I don't know, a forestry rec site, or I don't know what all the options might be, but I really do think that this should be on our long list of projects, because it has potential to be a really great spot.
Thank you. Councillor Zant.
I was just going to comment that I support the staff recommendation. One question I did have though is, what is the cost of the lease for that land?
There's no cost for the lease. It's done at $1 a year type process, but we are responsible for, if it turns to public use, we will be responsible for operations, maintaining, cleaning up, facilitating all of that, and putting any infrastructure in that becomes a village responsibility. And just as a reminder, this is an area that is outside the village boundaries. So we do have to look at the impacts that would have on our operations department in terms of budget and staffing.
And in saying that, like you said, we're short on staff as it is. Having somebody to monitor the area would be difficult. Is the impression I got from your report, Sheena, Ms. Fraser?
We would not be able to provide any by law enforcement, and that is the request that we receive the most, is that somebody needs to be out there managing it and moving people along, and we would not be able to facilitate that in any way, shape, or form.
Thank you, Ms. Fraser.
Gilmore, did you have some comments there?
No, I just had a question, actually. If we were to, obviously the lease has expired. It expired in 2019, and we were working towards a renewal, correct?
Sorry, the right-of-way agreement, the statutory right-of-way is expired in 2019. What we were doing is applying to have the tenure changed from utility to public, because right now it's utility. So technically, anyone accessing that area is not supposed to, because it's just for utility use or that footprint.
So at this point, we don't have a right of way in that area as a village.
And it's not a right of way from the road to the land. It was a right of way to facilitate the underground pipe. So the right of way is non-existent. We don't have any right of way agreement to access off the highway to the property, other than an access for a utility, one staff member for utility purposes.
Okay.
So it's not being used. It's not being used the way it should be at this time. More people are driving in there than are technically allowed.
Thank you. My thoughts are, I completely agree with Councillor Antonelli. I think that's a golden little spot that has a ton of value. I mean, any water access right now, I think, needs to be protected for the public. Also totally here, there's no way we could put any bylaw enforcement out on that site. That's just not within our capacity in any way. So I get that. Very much like Councillor Noble's idea, and I hadn't thought of that, about being able to gate it off so it's trail and water access only. And I wonder, so a couple things come to mind. I wonder with that, there's very little that has to be done to the area. I don't feel there is anything for Public Works to really manage out there if it's a water and trail access beyond the occasional danger tree or that sort of thing that has to be looked at. So I think there's real potential for that idea. And if that's in itself, it doesn't work, or it makes more sense perhaps for the SLRD to hold that, I would suggest that before we rescind our tenure application, we have a conversation with the SLRD to see if there's an appetite to take it over on their side. But before we rescind anything, I want to make sure that we've looked at any opportunity to retain that asset for the public, because I think it's gold. So I can, or staff can easily take that in different ways to either PVIS or and then the board.
Well, if I can recommend, maybe staff reach out and have an initial conversation, and then we could work together to bring that forward to whether it's a PVIS meeting or whatever the appropriate next step would be.
And perhaps there's a desire at the SLRD level to take that application and makes it simpler. But yeah, I would personally, before we make a resolution to rescind that tenure, I'd like to see us make a couple more steps to see how we can retain that asset. So how are people feeling about that? Are we good to give direction to staff to discuss with the SLRD the options around that tenure?
Yes.
I agree.
Yeah, I'll make that motion.
Second.
Seconder. Councillor Noble, any further discussion? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much, Ms. Fraser.
If I can just make a comment on that one, just
Yeah, for sure.
right now, we're all reviewing work plans, so we need to see where that's going to fit in. So it probably won't be actioned right away, but it will be added to the work plan. I just wanted council to be aware of that.
Understood that there are capacity issues. I feel as long as we're not rescinding the current application, then it's fine. It's in the queue and we can carry on.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that's my place. We're on to bylaws, number 12. We're going to wait for some more staff to join us. Awesome. So good evening, Ms. Pedrini and Mr. Chalmers. Thank you for joining us this evening. Whenever you're ready, we're ready to talk about the OCP bylaw number 654, amendment École de la Vallée 902. I'll turn it over to you when you're ready.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm just going to take a second here to share my screen. All right. So can you see my my screen here?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so good evening, Mayor and Council. As I already said, so the purpose of this report tonight is for Council to concurrently consider first and second readings to an official community plan and zoning bylaw amendment to facilitate the development of a new public school in Pemberton. Oh goodness, how do I do this? Okay. So the public school would be a Francophone first educational facility and would obviously be a great asset to our community since we do have quite a number of Francophone families in Pemberton and outside the community as well. So the subject lands are shown in this map here. They're basically north of Highway 99, just before you enter into the village. The legal description is shown. It does not have a civic address at this point. The existing use of the lands are vacant. It is zoned CD5 or Comprehensive Development Zone 5, which is a TIADA zone. And it is designated in our official community plan for residential use. The site area is about 10 acres. So on this slide, we have a picture of the concept plan for the lands, which are shown at the bottom here in red. So basically what we're looking at would be a new school that would serve about 390 students, that would also offer 12 infant, toddler, childcare spaces and about 25 preschool spaces, but it would be limited to children of Francophone families. In terms of future enrollment, the School District 93 expects to see enrollment of the new proposed school from nearby areas such as Whistler, mostly for its secondary program. There are a few encumbrances on the site. The BC Hydro right-of-way takes up about 3.18 acres of usable space. So that leaves the usable space of the site down to about 5.9 acres. So I'll just sort of zoom in here to the site plan so you can get a better idea of some of the detail. So here would be the location of the school footprint. As I've mentioned, it would be a 3-story K-12, approximately 5,000 square meters. I believe that would be a basketball court shown at the back here, as well as a full-size playing field. And the school building itself would also feature a full-size gymnasium. Proposed site access would come off of Highway 99. At this point in time, the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure has given preliminary approval for, at minimum, a right in and right out access The school district is continuing to pursue a full movement intersection, but that decision lies squarely with the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, whether or not, you know, they will meet the criteria for a full movement infrastructure, but that is definitely the preference. So as you move in through the site, there is 2 spots here for possible community gardens. This kind of mirrors where the community garden location would have been located under the current zoning, which was meant to be for residential use or an expansion of the Tayada neighborhood. We also show that the school access would carry on, would allow a gated connection to the Tayada, let me just go back a second here, to the Tayada road that will be developed in phase 4 of the Tayada subdivision. The reason that a gate would be required here is this is a strata road in red or pink. And then this would be a public road. But what this would allow would be for an alternate means of access in case of an emergency for the community to travel through Tayada Boulevard onto this future road and then out and head south on the highway, or if we do get a full movement intersection, then turn left and head towards the Lillooet area. So what else can I tell you about this? And we also have lots of parking shown and a bus loading area on site. Another important factor is this is the location of the proposed creek pedestrian bridge over Pemberton Creek that was committed to under the Tayada development. And as council probably remembers, staff did bring forward a report in 2020 asking council to remove a restrictive covenant that covered this property that contained commitments that would have been required if this property would have continued on with its residential use of small lot residential. So I will get to the community amenity contributions portion of this proposal, but I just wanted to mention that the community garden, this trail connection here that would, once again, I'll just flip back here, that would travel across lot 13, which we've planned for as part of our agricultural parks plan, as well as our hopefully future park and ride, which would be located here. So that would allow that pedestrian connection to follow through and connect onto the Valley Loop Trail and around. Okay, so moving on, I'll just let you know where we are at with the application process. So the application was submitted in October of 2020. A report to council requesting your consideration of section 475 early and ongoing consultation was presented soon after. And then staff began the internal and external referrals. Our advisory land use commission reviewed and supported the application in November of 2020. As well, the developers held a public information meeting in November of 2020, and about 49 people attended that public consult or information session. And there was, I was there, Councillor Craddock was there. There was no opposition mentioned at that time, mainly just questions about the process and timing of the application. And now we move through to tonight, which, as I've already mentioned, is for consideration of first and second reading of the OCP and zoning bylaw amendments. If council's satisfied to give those bylaws first and second reading, then we can go ahead and schedule a public hearing. I have suggested that this take place on your first meeting in July at 5:30 p.m. But we can discuss other alternate dates when we get there. And then, as we all know, it would, after the public hearing, we can consider third reading, and then the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure must sign off prior to adoption or fourth reading. Okay, so I just wanted to kind of give a a really brief sort of overview of what we would be changing in terms of our official community plan amendment. So we do require text amendments to basically consider the institutional use that this proposed school would bring to the Tayada neighborhood, and whether or not that would fit with the vision of the Tayada neighborhood. There's also a couple of map redesignations that need to be made. Currently, the whole property, well, except for this green portion and this bit of commercial, is designated residential in yellow. And so we would be looking at changing the land use designation for the bottom portion of the site to purple to match with Signal Hill and the community center. That's the designation we use for civic institutional uses. And then in terms of our zoning bylaw amendment, so currently the zoning for this piece of land is Comprehensive Development 5 or CD5, as I've already mentioned. And the approach that was taken with the CD5 was to split up the land base into different areas. And so this is currently a depiction of what kind of uses are allowed in each area. So number one is the office apartment use. That is right off of Portage Road. Number two is your small lot land uses. I believe 4 in our current is duplexes. 6 is parks. And so that includes this portion here, which would be our community garden. And 5 being just a continuation of the single family uses. And number 3 was a small piece of land that was gifted by the developer to the village for an affordable housing use. It's not a great piece of land. It's not very large to begin with, and it has really difficult access given that it's located right on the turn there of Highway 99, and it's also underneath the BC Hydro right-of-way. So yeah, I mean, of course, affordable housing is a main priority of council, but I just wanted to mention that the piece of land that we were given for that use wasn't ideal in the first place, and staff didn't find it would be a very feasible piece of land to develop in future if it remained zoned for that use.
Can I make one comment? Sorry, Ms. Pedrini. The land actually wasn't gifted to us right now, but it was the potential in the future development to be gifted to the village as affordable housing. So we haven't, it's not in our name.
Okay.
It's still in the development's name.
Right. Okay. My apologies. And anyway, so this would be the revised key map for the CD5 zone. So again, we have our commercial, it's more office and apartment use, 4 now being our parks use, 3 being duplex, and 2 being single family small lots. And then we would dedicate the whole of this bottom portion or the subject property that we're looking at tonight for a school use. And under that school use, that would also allow daycare, and as well, community gardens are a use that are permitted in all zones. So we didn't have to make a specific change to the zone to enable the community garden use to continue. Okay. So basically, there's a lot in this report. It's quite a large, about 14 or 17 page report. I was trying to keep it brief tonight, but I'm obviously available for questions, and Cameron is here as well. But I just wanted to sum up that, you know, we have heard from our referral agencies. We have heard from our Advisory Land Use Commission, and we have heard from, you know, a few members of the public that attended the public information meeting, as well as one resident who has also already sent us an email letting them know they are in fully support of this land use and rezoning change. So basically, our sort of staff recommendation at this point is that the addition of an institutional use in the Tayada special planning area and in the CD5 zone will be in character with the surrounding residential neighborhood and will provide employment and educational facilities close to the downtown core and close to other public institutions like our skateboard park, our elementary school, our community center, etc. So just a brief outline here of the benefits. And this is where we'll get in the conversation of community amenity contributions. So the village would be seeing the development of a new K-12 public school, additional childcare spaces, and a Francophone cultural hub. At this point in time, we are looking at about 37 childcare spaces that would be created, which would obviously reduce pressure on our local childcare providers. And along with the school comes access to playing fields and a full-size gymnasium, as also already mentioned. We would be seeing the potential development of more community garden space, and that would be open to the public at large, not just to families or students of the school. And we would benefit from the pedestrian connections that the developers are willing to give us across their property to make important connections with their proposed commuter trail across Lot 13, as well as connecting to the Friendship Trail. And we'll also be gaining, this is quite huge, an emergency access route through Tayada, so giving us an alternate to Portage Road in the case of an emergency and we need to evacuate community members in that direction. One thing we're not getting a firm confirmation on is the pedestrian bridge connection. So at this point in time, we have to keep in mind that the project is entirely dependent on capital funding support of the province, which is specific to the construction costs only, and so therefore does not include allocation for community-based amenities. And on that note, it is important to advise that our community amenity contribution policy would not require an amenity from this redevelopment because we only ask for contributions or expect contributions for residential land use changes. So there's no density increase here. This is a civic and an institutional use. So under our policy, we wouldn't actually require a contribution. However, there is willingness on the part of the applicant to collaborate with the village and to see that that pedestrian connection does occur in the future. So basically they've made a commitment that they would work together with the village to make the business case to the province and to hopefully attain this unique community amenity, especially if it could help the project or accelerate the approval process. So what else can I say? Other benefits to the community will be, obviously, there'll be some local employment, teaching positions. The CSF let us know that approximately 60 teachers and support staff would be hired, about 6 clerical positions, and there would be opportunities for construction and sub-trade work for the community based on this $40 million capital investment by the province of BC. So there are a few conditions that we would want to make council aware of that staff would be recommending, that these would be requirements that would have to be fulfilled before adoption of the bylaw if council feels inclined to support the bylaws and move forward. And so I put them up here on the screen, but I can just quickly read through them. So we would be asking them to enter into a section 219 no build restrictive covenant. So that would prohibit the issuance of any building permit or any use of the portion of the site as a school until the following amenities, works and services have been constructed to the satisfaction of the village. And they can either do that by entering into a service agreement or another acceptable form posted as a security. So we'd be asking them to complete either a servicing agreement or a security to ensure that community garden and parking areas is included in the development, that the pedestrian cycling trail links that have been offered are what's the word? Committed to, that we would have the road connection between the school site and the Taya Strata for use as an emergency access or exit. And then there's also, I didn't mention this when we were looking at the site plan, but the construction and registration of a hammerhead at the northwest corner of the site for the vehicle circulation at the terminus of Tayada Boulevard. At this point in time, the intention was that Tayada Boulevard would continue down into the subject property and service houses. So with that connection not following through, there needs to be a means of turning around, especially for our emergency vehicles, as well as some offsite sanitary sewer upgrades as determined by the village engineer. And that was included in the report, as there was an area there that needed some attention. As well, we'd be asking the applicants to prepare and submit in a registratable form statutory right-of-ways to provide public access to the community, public use of the community garden area. The public access statutory right-of-ways for those pedestrian cycling trail links that would cross the subject property. And to also allow the road connection between the school and the Tayada Strata for use as the emergency access, as already stated, as well as the construction and registration of the hammerhead. And as usual, we always include the final requirement being the payment of any outstanding fees. So I believe that is the end of my presentation, so I can stop sharing my screen now. And yes, Cameron and I are here and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Virginia. That's a lot of information. Thank you for the report. One quick question. So the 219 covenant is dependent on the construction of the Pemberton Creek Bridge, or it isn't?
I would include the construction of the bridge in the Section 219 no build covenant. I think it would send a real strong message to the province that this is something that the village really wants to see completed. And although the CSF isn't able to give us commitment that they'll have the funds to pay for that, I think we can just bank on the fact that they're very committed to working together and putting together a good case to the province that those funds would result in a much needed community asset that was always connected to this portion of land.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's it. It always was a part of that plan. So I just, and the applicants understand the strength in the 219 covenant or what that means in terms of the bridge. Like I just want to make sure, like on one hand, it sounds like, well, in the current budget, it's not there, recognizing that the funds that are going to be supplied to them are for the construction of the school first off, and that's where they have to direct their funds. I get that. I just want to make sure that the 219 covenant is very clear to them in terms of that requirement. And I'm sure it is. It's just, I'll bring that up. I have more comments on it. I'll open it up for question first. There were lots of information there. So let's start with questions only, please. Councillor Craddock.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you very much for the report. It was really well presented, and I really had a good time reading through it. Two things come to mind. Number one, the hammerhead turnaround, and also the bridge is a concern for me. I'm wondering why Tayada is not responsible for those, because that was part of the initial site agreement plan, and why we're putting that over to a nonprofit school, I don't understand. Can someone explain that to me, please?
I think I might ask Cameron to tackle that one. My first thought would be that The bridge was connected to this particular property. The restricted,
Well,
yeah.
and if it's connected to that property and the Tayada people have sold it, their responsibility continues with that bridge into phase 4. And I just don't understand why that person is getting away with passing it off to a new buyer.
Chalmers, would you like to add some comment?
Mr. Mayor, through you, I don't know if I have much to add to that. There are some challenges with it, and particularly since the village doesn't have much leverage over Tayada at this point. There's one, perhaps two remaining subdivision applications that are coming. Now, what has to happen for this to be secured is that this entity would have to make the commitment to deliver it. Now, there is still the opportunity to open up that conversation about who actually pays for it. But it would have to be assigned to one of the properties, and this is the opportunity that council has to associate it, this project, the bridge to this project. There really is not an opportunity remaining to tie it directly to Tayada through an approvals process.
Do we not have an agreement in place with Tayada in phase 4 that they're to complete the sidewalk to the school? Can it not be added to that?
Mr. Mayor, through you, as I said, the approving officer will be making some decisions around some of the remaining works that need to be completed before the phase 4 subdivision is approved. We can certainly take a look at that, but I don't know that we would be able to necessarily make an offsite obligation for something like this easily as a prerequisite to subdivision approval. So there certainly can be ongoing discussions around cost sharing or attribution of the cost to other parties, but I don't know how we would assign it to a development approval off of this property.
Okay, and I guess I'm having trouble understanding why, when we negotiated this agreement with Tayada multi-years ago, that was part of the agreement to do the whole site. And now they seem to be finding a way to pass it off to somebody else, and that doesn't feel good to me. So yeah, please work on that to the best of your ability. I don't see why a nonprofit should be stuck with the commitment that was made to council years ago. Just one other statement, if you don't mind. I see that in your reference, you call it a public school. That's confusing for people in town. I wonder if we should call it a public francophone school? Because I've had a lot of people say to me, oh, can I put my kids in the school? And then I have to explain, no, it's a francophone school. So it's a simple thing, but I wonder if you could add that in there. Thank you.
I can speak to that. I mean, it is a francophone French first school, but the way zoning works is we zone on the basis of the use and not the user. So it shouldn't matter whether, who's using it, but just for public perception, yes, it is limited to francophone families.
Thank you very much. That's all I want people to understand. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Councillor Antonetti, go ahead.
Is the daycare limited to francophone families?
Yes.
Questions from council? Councillor Zan.
Just in regards to the change in the bylaw to from civic to institutional use. So I'm assuming that means institutional use can be any school, and just for future planning, if the francophone school decides to close, that school could be used for, say, middle school or another elementary school or private school. It's not going to be just a francophone school.
Correct.
If I may, Richard.
Go ahead.
The other question I had is in regards to your flow chart. When it says the Modi sign off was quite further down the line, I guess my concern is that there's going to be a lot of staff time put into putting all this together, and then at the very end, there's the Modi. Pretty much the very end is the Modi sign off. Does the school district kind of already have that in line that Modi will sign off on this? Because the way I see it is that if we put all the staff time into it, just to have Modi say no, it seems like for lack of a better term, a waste of staff time.
All right. Yeah, I can answer that question. So The Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure has guaranteed a right-in, a right-out access to Highway 99 at a minimum. And as I mentioned, it is the applicant's preference to have a full movement intersection, but that still is in progress, the work that needed to obtain that access permit. Cameron, would you have anything more to add to that?
Mr. Mayor, through you, just in terms of the timing, that's actually established by statute. So within 800 meters of a controlled access intersection with a highway, MOTI must sign the bylaw after third reading. So we do understand there will be an approved access. As Ms. Pedrini described, it will be one of two forms. We're hoping it's a full movement, but MOTI, we should have that information sooner than approval of the bylaw, but MOTI will sign when the application is forwarded to them for signature.
Thank you. With regards to the intersection, you know, as you said, right in, right out guaranteed. They'd like a full intersection. We've often, you know, spoken about wanting a better intersection there that will allow for traffic or pedestrian traffic to 1 mile and safer crossing of 99. Do we have the ability to influence that discussion with MOTI regarding that intersection, or is that purely between the developer and MOTI?
Cameron, I'll defer to you.
Mr. Mayor, through you, not in a direct sense. I mean, I think we've had a very good collaboration with the applicant and the applicant's engineers and MOTI to try and come up with a quick and reasonable solution to this. Pedestrian access has been contemplated. I can't provide necessarily an as of today update. It is one of the considerations, but first and foremost was trying to ensure there was some level of appropriate access to the school. So council, if you proceed with this, would be proceeding effectively with a right in, right out as the minimum. And ideally there'll be other matters dealt with in terms of a full movement and pedestrian access as part of the next round. But it's not fully resolved now, and we acknowledge that to council, but we felt it was important to get the bylaws in front of you to initiate the process.
Thank you. I think that if there's considerable community value to having a pedestrian crossing or access there, especially once that bridge over to the Creekside is built and it's all connected, as we've talked about. So I'm hopeful we can take part in that conversation and influence the results on that. Any other questions before we go into comments? Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions. Would people like to comment on their thoughts? No comments? Okay, I'll lead off. I feel like the school brings some good professional jobs. I feel that the daycare and other amenities brings are very of great value to the community. I agree with the comments that that bridge was part of the plan from the beginning, and I want to make sure that it's clear to the applicants and throughout the process that this is a priority for us. You know, there could be creative ways to make that happen for sure. But you know, if we feel that we can secure that through the 219 and make sure that conversation carries on, then I'm supportive of what staff has presented to us today. I'd also like consideration, you know, it was kind of mentioned in the report, I'd like consideration to be made as we're moving forward to negotiate and have conversations around community use of things like the gymnasium and potentially of a theater. I think, you know, if there was a stage and theater in that school that could also be used by the community, that would be a huge value because we don't have anything like that in Pemberton. And so if there is a willingness on the part of the CSF to have those conversations, I would like to make sure that staff is very much engaged in that. We saw how that didn't work in some ways with the Signal Hill Community School aspect of that school. So yes, I would just like to direct staff to make sure that we are having a conversation to see how throughout the stages of application and approvals that we're able to secure community use wherever possible of community gardens, soccer fields, basketball court, gymnasium, theater, etc. So those would be my comments. In general, I support what's been put in front of council at this point. Councillor Caddick, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'll move recommendation 1.
Second.
And we got a seconder, Councillor Zant. Any discussion? Councillor Antonella, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm generally supportive. I do have a few concerns. So I think the write-in, write-out access is problematic. I don't think it works very well at all because anyone leaving the school will have to find a turnaround down the highway to return back to town. So I think we should move ahead, but if full access isn't secured, I think there's a problem there. I also have an issue with how the amenity package from Toyota has been secured or not secured. So, the affordable housing wasn't a gift to the community. It was part of the amenity package that was negotiated with the developer. And so I think, now we're seeing the fallout of removing the amenity covenant from the property without further negotiations, because now we're losing our affordable housing. I think probably the Village of Pemberton shouldn't have accepted a parcel of land for affordable housing that wasn't viable. But I would like to see us go back to the developer and try and recoup the amenities that were promised. So that includes the bridge and the affordable housing. I also feel concerned that we're losing the potential for a fully functioning second access to town. So now we see that we'll have an emergency access, but it's gated, so it's essentially not really functional. And I would be interested to see what the wording is on the covenants and whatnot that govern the Strata Road. Does it really say no public access to lands beyond? Because generally in strata developments, access to lands beyond is always guaranteed. So if that wasn't secured, I'm wondering why. Let's see here. I'm kind of wondering where the 60 staff are going to live in Pemberton and whether their wages will be, equivalent to cover the housing costs in Pemberton. And I'm concerned that the daycare is limited to Francophone families. I think some more flexibility should be considered, because after all, the other daycares accept people of all languages, right? Yeah, so I would say in the recommendation, we should amend it to specifically require the bridge. I know we talked about that with covenant. And then in 2C, I also think that we should remove the word emergency from the access clause. I think that we should pursue a functional access.
Thank you. Mr. Chalmers, can you speak to the access to lands beyond and how that works with that Strata Road?
Sure, Mayor, Mr. Mayor, through you. There's a requirement of the Land Title Act that when you approve a subdivision, there's demonstration of access to lands beyond. At some point, a decision was taken that Toyota would be a strata road. So that road is private. That road does not have public access. It does not have public access across it beyond the park. The reason why that was probably able to proceed and why it got through land titles is that this property that we're discussing does have access to a public road off of the highway. So the act doesn't say that you have to provide the optimal access, public access to lands beyond. It says there must be access. And in this case, it would have met that test. The challenging thing with looking at public access through this site is that we're not looking at any road dedication. If we were to take road dedication on the school site, it would terminate at a private strata road without the benefit of any public access, or realistically an opportunity to get any public access. So I know over the years, there's been many discussions around an alternate and a secondary access out of the downtown. And this option was explored in from every conceivable angle, and it was not viable. And not as a result of this application, as a result of the stratification of the Bearland stratification of the land at Toyota. So as a fallback, staff looked at what opportunities may exist, and the emergency access is the only way to provide an alternate access in the event of an emergency or however that agreement ends up being worded. But unfortunately, that's a public thoroughfare is not an option at this point.
Thank you.
May I speak to the amenities? So just as a reminder, council did cancel the restrictive covenant that included the amenities that were attached to this land prior to this application coming forward at the request of the landowner. And given that this application does not include residential or densification, our community amenity contributions policy does not apply. However, the applicants have been willing, and obviously, all community amenity contributions are voluntary. The village cannot demand or require amenities, but they must be satisfied with a proposed amenity package. But yeah, I would feel that given that the covenant has been removed and we're talking with a new landowner that is a nonprofit, to expect them to be providing land for affordable housing to the village would be a deal breaker, to tell you the truth.
Thank you. Again, the bridge was part of the requirements and the needs from the community from the beginning. And I think when those covenants were removed, it was with the understanding that that was sort of to be reestablished. And I'm hopeful that the 219 covenant has that level of security. I see Mr. Jones has that level of security to make sure the bridge can happen. And it might take us a creative approach, working with perhaps Triada and the village and other funding. I don't know, but I think what we're hearing from council is that we see the value in this project. We want to make sure that the important connection from that bridge is not just part of the conversation, but reaffirmed as top priority for, as it has been all the way along through that development. Mr. Chalmers, did you have some clarity?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, just two small points of clarity. One, part of the reason why the bridge is being pursued outside of the community amenity contribution policy is it's one of few desired projects in the neighborhood concept plan for this area. So it specifically talks to a bridge regardless of land use. So on the strength of the OCP requirement is why the bridge has been included. And there was a reference to adding the bridge into the prerequisites for adoption. I would draw council's attention, that is captured in the last few words of point B. And staff would anticipate before the public hearing, there'll be some additional detail, a term sheet perhaps, adding some more information to what each of those points in the resolution would need. So council will see more information next at the public hearing.
Thank you. Further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I will call the question on the motion. All in favor, or any opposed? Motion carries. And do we need a second motion, or that goes all the way to the and that's right? The two and that's, we're good. Thank you.
There's one for scheduling a public hearing
Right.
for July 13th, I believe.
So that's a separate motion. So gotta get a motion that a public hearing be scheduled. Moved by Councillor Zan, seconded by Councillor Noble. Any discussion? Any opposed? Motion carries. And that takes care of that. Thank you very much, Ms. Pedrini and Mr. Chalmers. Have a great night.
Thank you.
We've been at this for over an half. I'm going to call a 5-minute recess for anybody that needs quick 5-minute breaks, and then we'll get through the rest of the agenda. So it's 7:05. Let's bring it back and reopen at 7:10, please. Looks like everybody's here. Are we all good to go, Gwendolyn? Perfect. Okay, so I'll reopen the regular council meeting, and we're on to item 13, which is the mayor's report. I do have a number of meetings and conversations to report on. I'll start with the SLRD meeting from last week, and some of the highlight items for us. One of them was the short-term bed and breakfast zoning amendment. This was up for third reading and adoption. I've spoken to this a couple times in my reports. Basically for area C, it was area C, area A, and area D all had different changes, and the public hearings on both this and the affordable housing amendment that I'll speak to in a second were for all three areas. With regards to area C, the principal language was around using carriage houses, using principal residences, the ability to do that for short-term rentals and bed and breakfasts. Secondary suites were not allowed or included in that language, as they felt that it cut into the rental market, the long-term rental market. In terms of those Airbnb or those short-term rental and bed and breakfast that amendment, it would include, similar to what we put forward, a good neighbor agreement, life and safety checks of the building, adherence to noise and disturbance bylaws, etc. There was a public hearing held on this, and there was no opposition to the amendment, and it was given third reading and adopted. We also looked at an amendment with regards to affordable housing. And again, I've reported on this in the past. What came out in the public hearing on this one was centered around the Wedgwoods neighborhood. They are allowed 2 units, 2 supplementary units on their buildings. The zoning, the amendment or the bylaw was specific to say that they couldn't be used for short-term rentals. One of the comments that came through the public hearing, or I think a couple of comments that came through the public hearing was, would it be possible for one of the units to be allowed for short-term rentals and the second one for long-term rentals? And that way it would help pay for the cost of that housing. And the other one was around whether that second unit could be used for family use, short-term family use, that sort of thing, or whether it had to be put into the long-term rental unit. So that brought up some questions, and they're going to get reviewed. They're substantial enough that it might trigger another public hearing. It wasn't, those comments weren't allowed to be considered or able to be considered and then put into the third reading. So they will be considered by staff and brought back to the board, and it may trigger another public hearing. So that was not given adoption. We had Britannia Beach oceanfront developments. I've mentioned a couple months back that the board provided them their development permit for both the residential and the commercial side. They came back this past meeting with a request for some slight changes to those permits. Both with the residential and the commercial, neither of them include any change to the footprints, nor the density or the basic layout of the developments. With regard to the residential, it is mostly to allow for some rooftop decks to be added to the buildings as more livable space, as well as a few minor landscape changes. And with regards to the commercial, there was also landscape changes there, but it was mostly about moving some of the space usage around. So public washroom was moved from one building to another, as was the fitness facility. But again, no major changes to the development permit, so that was passed. There was a request for decision that came forward with regards to agricultural land reserve non-farm use, and this is on Squamish Valley Road. This is a rafting company that would like to use about, I think it's 0.8 hectares, including certain outbuildings on this this farm property, this ALR property, to be used as a staging area for the rafting outfit, as well as some winter storage. So there was a lot of discussion around this. They don't have an AAC down there that sort of makes referrals the way ours does on these non-farm use applications. Staff was directed to bring back some more information regarding to the impacts to the agricultural land. And the application made claims to providing agro-tourism opportunities through the rafting company. And so the board asked for some more specific examples of how that would work in actions, as well as to find out how the impacts to neighbors would play out. So that was not passed. It was asked to come back with more information. We reviewed the first quarter financials. This was very interesting. We got a solid waste management and diversion update. The long and short of it, I mean, it broke it down all in the region, but the long and short of it for here in Pemberton is that our diversion rates have improved significantly, but our diversion rates are a long, long way off from making the targets that we've set out in the waste management plan and in some of the climate action goals. So I'm hopeful that the new transfer station and more education through UES at the SLRD will improve that diversion rate, because we have to do better. Just shows once again the importance is also of sea to sky soils. There's discussion around the Jack Webster Bridge. I've reported on this before. It's getting replaced, and it's an interesting situation. It should be done by the end of October, but there's still a lot of questions out there that we're trying to get answered. BC Hydro has investment in this, or has a part in this. But essentially, there is the potential with this replacement of the bridge, with the arrangement as it stands, that the SLRD would take over 1.3 kilometers of road, as well as the ownership of the new bridge, which would be a bit of a unique situation for the regional district and could potentially bring costs with it. So there's a lot of discussion about who pays for the ongoing maintenance of the 1.3 kilometers and the bridge. Is it the number of residents that benefit and live up the road? Is it them alone? It was pointed out that many visitors to the Sea to Sky Trail use this road to access that portion of the trail, as well as other recreationalists. So it's an interesting situation. I'm not sure exactly how it's going to get sorted out, but yeah, it's a unique situation for the SLRD to potentially take on 1.3 kilometers of road and a bridge. We had a delegation from Geoscience BC, and this was in regards to slightly related to our delegation earlier tonight, the Garibaldi Volcanic Belt and Geothermal Resource Assessment. So this is a number of folks in partnership that have been studying the geothermal potential, geothermal power potential that is generated by Mount Meager, Canada's only live volcano, as it's known. And they're continuing this research to look at the Mount Cayley area. And really, it's all about economic development. What is the potential for conveying low carbon power to the lower mainland from the geothermal potential from Meager? And so it could have some really interesting implications, like I said, economic development and low GHG power. So phase 2 is underway, and we'll find out more about that. We had a delegation from the RCMP, similar to ours, although a little bit more regionally focused, obviously. Committee of the whole, we had 2 delegations on May 27th. The first was from the manager of industry development at Destination BC. And this is around a tourism innovation project. And I'd like to draw your attention to it, and maybe you could pass this around. This is a program that provides a whole number of supports for innovative tourism ideas, thinking about tourism in a new way, and ideas that can be generated. There is a number of supports from mentorship and business plan building and all that sort of thing, but they also run a Dragon's Den style, a friendly Dragon's Den style program, and they're going to launch one in the Sea to Sky region. It's going to start very soon. I believe the lead up is as we speak, and I believe the launch is September 1st, with the goal of selecting 3 winners by November. So again, this is for any innovative tourism ideas that any of our locals might have that they want to present. There's financial supports through this, there's mentorship support through this, and more grants. And again, it's sort of a Dragon's Den style. So if you know people, or you could pass it around through your networks, this could be an opportunity for some of our innovative tourism operators. And it could be an existing tourism supplier, or it could be a new startup. And then we also had a presentation from Destination BC about their new education initiative. And this is around, lower impact tourism, and led into the conversation that we've had at this table around how to manage tourism in our backcountry and on our parks, and invite people to enjoy our assets and leave no impact behind. So there's some education initiatives on there that if you go on their websites that are interesting to look at, And the conversation also led to some pressure from the board to Destination BC to work closer with BC Parks to get more, to push for more funds and resources. And then we spoke about ministers' meetings, which I think we already addressed. I had a Pemberton Valley Emergency Management Committee meeting, and I'll do it really quickly. I think maybe Councillor Craddock will have some information to add through PVDD. But very quickly, the gauges, the river gauges that we've discussed are about 3 to 6 months away. Tenure and other administrative processes are underway. We got a quick Arden Canal update. All that work is undergoing. You know, as referenced by Mr. Clark, there was $140,000 in sediment removal material sold this year. We know where a lot of that went, and we're hopeful that the fact that we were able to sell that material will make a strong case with the government to, or the provincial government to carry on with our sediment removal work and get some support on that. We got a update from Lilwad about the Pole Yard Dike. That area has all been, the dike upgrade, sorry, that area has all been cleared and prepped and approved. The tender's gone out and they hope to start construction around June 3rd, and that will be a huge asset for flood mitigation in that area. Sorry, talking about the gauges, to back up on that, the estimate from the Diking District is that for the gauges that we have proposed, there will be about a $45,000 a year cost. So there's a discussion about how those costs are going to get paid for from the partners and what that's going to look like. So we will be having a conversation on that coming up. I think that's it on that meeting. I don't know if you've noticed at the element at the the community center when you come down from the main door, that the curved wall in front of the landscaping has been paved in inclusive rainbow colors. And if you haven't seen it, go by and see it. This was an initiative that was brought to us by the Francophone School, and they wanted to make a statement about inclusivity around LGBTQ and inclusivity in general. And so they worked with our staff quite diligently to be able to do this project. If you haven't seen it, it's awesome. I think it makes a great statement. And so go by and have a look. I stopped by and spoke to Maud Sear, one of the teachers who really spearheaded this, and they're very proud of their work. Just a flag for staff, C.L. Gilmore, I don't know if I mentioned it, one of the things Maud Sear asked for was some sort of official picture ceremony, something. The kids are really, really excited about their work, and I think it would be really nice for them if I could go over and do something with them. So maybe you can flag this with Miss Hutchinson.
Well, we already have, and we've reached out to Ms. Sear to see how we could profile this, because we think it would be great to share in our e-news and to share more widely with the public. So I can ask her to send another follow-up email.
That'd be great, because I think the kids would really appreciate that.
Yeah.
I attended another meeting with regards to the Rutherford Kayak Park. Again, trying to make that asset more accessible for kayaking to locals, as well as the work towards creating a surf park, surf wave and surf park at the bottom part of it. That would also be accessible to locals. This is my third or fourth meeting on this in the last few months. Surf Pemberton representative Tyler Crashar was there this time, which was great. What I do want to flag on this is, basically the place we're at on this is trying to figure out what the administration and the funding and the decision-making looks like around this park. How do we make it locally accessible? How do we make it, the best asset possible for our valley? And how does it get funded? So I just want to flag it. We're in early stages, and there'll be more discussion further, but I just want to flag it with council. Two things, as a group in partnerships, there was discussion about how funding could be accessed. And when they looked to me, my comment was, we don't have a lot of funding for that sort of activity. If there are one-offs or potential supports, financial supports that might be able to be provided, I would suggest it would come through the PDIF fund through PVIS. and that's where they would make a presentation. But those big capital improvement and safety feature funds will have to come from somewhere else. But there was also talk about the governance board moving forward. Right now, I've been asked to stay part of the process, and I will until things are established. But once that's done, there's discussion about what the governance board will look like for this park. And this was a question that I have for the rest of you. I was asked if there was interest for the Village of Pemberton to remain, after things are established, part of this governance board or whatever it looks like over the park. My initial reaction was A, that I wanted to speak to the rest of you. B, I'm happy to be part of establishing it, but I don't know if there's a need. You know, we've already established that it needs to be a not-for-profit. I don't know that there's the need for Village of Pemberton representation once it's set up. My goal in being there was just to really make sure that it was a local asset and was accessible by locals. After that, I don't know if we need to be present. So I'll maybe quickly ask you that question, if there's interest in having the Village of Pemberton represent on that board. Well, and you don't have to answer. I'm putting you on the spot. This is something we could talk about as I go through more meetings, but let's just say it's a consideration. If you have any thoughts, feel free to put up your hand now, or we could talk about it another day.
Can I add a little, what we might want to do is maybe add it as a discussion when we're going through council appointments at the end of the year, potentially.
Sure. And if things progress further with like if the governance decisions come sooner than that, I can bring it back to council and we could have a discussion that I'm not catching you off guard. Go ahead, Fraser.
Have they established themselves as a not-for-profit society or setting up a board yet? Oh, okay.
We're not even close to that. We're
okay.
We're working through a whole bunch of terms right now, but it was as we were working through that, the question came to me: does the Village of Pemberton want to remain part of the decision-making group once the park is established?
Because one option would be that once they're set up, they send a letter requesting involvement or on the board.
I'll bring that back. I think I'm getting close. The not much to. Oh, one of the things that came out of my meeting, one of my meetings with MP Weiler, is the Community Healthy Initiatives funding is going to be re-upped. It sounds like there's another stream coming through, and so I'm sure you'll get wind of it. But just a heads up to staff that whether this is an opportunity to look at funding for skating rink in the barn or park and rides or any grants that we don't get.
Sorry, this was Healthy Communities, correct?
This is the Healthy Initiatives.
Yep. Healthy. So we actually have a report and information coming on June 15th for council to make a resolution.
Perfect. And it sounds like it'll be renewed as well with a second go around. So that's great. My VCH calls have been mostly around vaccinations. I don't think I passed on that information. Just a quick update. Community Center Thursday, June 3rd and June 10th from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Now open to all people age 12 and up. Last week, the government announced the BC's restart plan step 1 now in effect. And I think we know all the details around that. I received the very last minute, in my mind, minister's meeting invitation for Friday to review the BC restart plan. So I'll find out more about that. A couple quick notes. Property taxes and utilities are due on Friday, July 2nd. And the Participation Community Better Challenge, which is it's participation, so it's obvious what it's about. There's prizes and all that sort of fun stuff. I'd like to encourage people to have a look at that at participation.com. And I'm very pleased, the CEO put out an email, but I just want to announce that our new COVID-19 online hub, One Pemberton, is now live. The idea behind the hub, as discussed in the past, came through the task force, and the idea was to bring together all the many supports and good work that's being done around the community, be it financial supports, social services, mental health, all that sort of thing, to bring those together. And staff's done a wonderful job. It's called onepemberton.ca. Please have a look at it. I think you'll see it's really intuitive. It's really easy to navigate, and I'm hopeful and that it'll provide the service that we intended for people. So pass it around. We need to let people know that it's out there for them. It's a one-stop shop for, like I say, all time, whether it's tenancy information down to social services and housing opportunities. So I recommend having a look at that. And I'm almost done. The last thing I want to mention or talk about is the conversation that's come back up in town regarding our awesome teenagers and some of the recent interactions between teenagers and our awesome RCMP, and some of the disturbances that have been experienced. So I think we're all aware of the conversation around town. There have been some loud evenings in town where people have complained about noise from teenage activities. I don't want to get into great detail about this. I just want to mention a few things. I just want to say that the RCMP is very alert to the activities. They're trying really hard to work with the teenagers. I think it's a really difficult conversation. I think we're seeing a number or a full spectrum of behavior in that. There are certainly some kids whose behavior and decision making maybe isn't perfect and requires some attention, so to speak. And I think there's a lot of kids out there on the streets in the evenings at the skate park and moving about that are honestly just looking for something to do. That's always an issue in a small town. And I think the fact that we are shut down in so many ways over the last 15 months from extracurricular activities and being able to go on to tournaments and play sports to going to other communities and traveling and whatever else, there's even less for teenagers to do. And I think there's a lot of pent up energy and a lot of pent up anxiety. And unfortunately, again, there's not a lot of things for our teenagers to do necessarily on a Friday night. So there's been kids congregating. From what I've seen, for the most part, it is benign teenage behavior. Perhaps voice levels are a little high at times. And I know there's other behavior that is less desirable, and I know there's been interaction with the police. And I just want to, through this report, remind all of us, remind parents to have the conversation with the kids that the RCMP are just doing their job. They're trying to protect the neighborhood. They're trying to protect the teenagers. They're trying to ensure the peaceful enjoyment of the properties of the people that live in Pemberton. And just have a conversation, because again, I feel like all spectrum of behaviors out there, most of them are just out there having a good time and trying to release some energy and spend some time together and be social. And so I think there's a lot of work to be done here to make sure that the relationship between all of us and the cops and the teenagers and all that is where it should be. But I think the first step perhaps is conversations with our teenagers as parents, to just remind them that the RCMP is doing their job and that we love and support them, and that there's certain behavior within the village that, is acceptable, and there's certain decisions that aren't. So I think that's where the conversation starts. And I just wanted to make that comment. And in my limited experience as a coach and a father and all that stuff, I think we have awesome teenagers in our community. And I think they're wonderful, and we support them and recognize that it's been a tough 15 months for them too. And we just got to talk about mutual respect. That is my very lengthy report. Thank you for your patience. I will turn it over to council reports. Councillor Craddock, go ahead.
Thanks very much, Mayor Richmond, and thank you for doing my full report, except for 2 items on Pemberton Valley Diking District. That saved me a lot of voice here right now. The 2 items that you missed were the hydrometric gauges that were going to be installed on the Green River and the Miller Weir. They're about to go ahead and put them in, and found out they've never had tenure on those 2 areas. So now the inspector Dyke has said you have to apply for tenure and through the province, and that could take at least 6 months time frame. So that's going to put things behind a little bit. And the second item that was missed in your report was there's some talk at the Diking District about the need to amalgamate either with the regional district or the village of Pemberton. They had a meeting last month with the minister, who said very clearly that they would not be going ahead as a diking district any longer. There was only a couple left in the province, and they were all reminded that had to be wound up a number of years ago. In that conversation, talking about which one would be maybe the option to go with, what came out of it is they feel the village of Pemberton would be represented by local people, whereas if they went with a regional district, it would be potentially run by directors that aren't directly affected by what happens in our community. So I guess that'll be an ongoing discussion as we go along. One of the issues besides that came up is they will not be allowed to apply for any funding until such time as either the regional district or the village of Pemberton have ownership of the dikes. And that's one of the requirements of it. So hopefully we can find a way to work with them if that's their choice. I'm not sure that maybe there's an opportunity to work with them like we're doing with the community forest, where we bring them on board with their assets and then have an individual board like we do for the community forest, which will leave their board of directors still in place. But that's a further discussion, and I look forward to that coming up. And if that happens with either one of the institutions, then they'll be able to apply directly for funding without being restricted. So maybe some good news coming down the line for them as far as getting funding in the future. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I think though, one of the challenges with that that's been identified is in the past few years, we've looked at funding for dike work and flood mitigation, and through PVMC and all of us, we've sort of divided and conquered in that low watt SLRD, VOP, and diking districts have all applied for up to $750,000 of funding, and we've been all successful. So do the math, that's $3 million altogether. If and when the diking district becomes absorbed or part of, whether it's the VOP or low water SLRD, that becomes one less body that can continue to apply for the funding. And that's something Mr. Clark has identified, that it might mean we lose some of the ability to access that funding. So as Councillor Craddock says, more discussions to be had on this. You know, the system also works quite well in our region. You know, there's a lot of complicating factors to taking over ownership of all those dikes and all that infrastructure. So, and perhaps this will come back as we spoke about earlier in one of our ministerial meetings at UBCM. Thank you for that update. Any other council reports?
Can I make a quick comment about the diking district?
Mm-hmm.
Just so council knows, the CAO Helmer from the SLRD, myself, and Mr. Clark from PVDD are meeting with members from Inspector of Dikes this Friday to have a conversation. The Inspector of Dikes in Flinroe have been actually wanting us to work in the Pemberton Valley as sort of one entity, as we all know. That's why we created the PVMC. And they were shocked to hear that the funding structure has changed in that, you know, we need to retain whoever is applying needs to have ownership of the assets moving forward. And we can't apply together as for one project. They hadn't been made aware of this situation. So hopefully they will be able to help support us as we move forward. And this is sort of a kickoff meeting to understand a strategy for us all to move forward. So I think it's good next step.
Thank you. Councillor Noble, go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple items. On the 13th, I attended my first virtual LGLMA conference, and Mayor Richmond sponsored the resolution for funding support to manage post-COVID-19 funding, which got an impressive 100% endorsement. And I sponsored my first resolution, which is the one to consider a name change for the province and flag and coat of arms for British Columbia, which at this time received 40% endorsement, so it was defeated. But it was nice to see there was that much open-minded people willing to consider changes of that magnitude. And this morning I attended the Community Disaster Resilience Plan project introduction and launch, which was kind of like trying to take a drink out of a fire hydrant. It was impressive. They walked us through their new website, and it's going to be really exciting to see what comes out of it. They've got a whole system where you kind of check boxes for what's relevant for the community. I don't know if I can summarize this very well. And you can print out reports, and it just really helps narrow down the relevant information. And yeah, I think we're going to have another meeting in the near future to kind of get us better oriented on it. It was a lot of info. That's all I've got.
Anyone else? Councillor Zan.
Thank you, Mayor Richmond. Yeah, Mayor Richmond and I attended the last PVIS meeting where we heard from the rec manager, just a brief update for her, the Emera Community Center. Over the last quarter, as we can all assume, that the registrations have gone down. The revenue's gone down, which is on par with having a community center during the pandemic. We reviewed the shelf-ready projects, which included phase 4 of the water park, shade structures. The rec manager did say there was still a lot of programming going on during the pandemic, which she thought was fantastic because a lot of the programmers have gone through with making COVID protocols and still having those instructor-led courses for people, whether they're adults or kids. There was a motion on the table by the manager to slightly increase the fees, 1.8%, which went to the board. Not so much in drop-in fees, but more in just room rental fees. So that went to the board. They've done away with the paper copies of the advertising for programming. They're going strictly digital now. Just moreover, it's easier to deal with on PDF as opposed to printing them off and handing them out. Helmore gave a report on the regional business liaison person who was hired for a one-year term to support businesses to deal with the COVID-19 impacts on local businesses within the SLRD. Her hope there is for that person to be able to connect businesses, small businesses, large businesses, to help them connect with resources. So hopefully to help them keep their doors open. And I have a library meeting this coming Thursday.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? All right, thanks everyone. Down to correspondence, we have none for action. We have 9 correspondence for information. Would anybody like to pull any of these items out?
Richmond.
Go ahead, Councillor Zant.
I believe it's page 102. Just pull up my agenda.
Head 1.
Number I, so Bravo India. It's the presenting a resolution in support of the national 3-digit suicide prevention hotline.
Okay, we'll pull that out. Would anybody like to pull anything else out? Can somebody move receipt of 2 correspondence for information 2 to 9?
Move receipt.
Councillor Noble, second by Councillor Caddick. Any opposed? Motion carries. Item 1 regarding a resolution to support a national 3-digit suicide prevention hotline. Go ahead, Councillor Zant.
I saw this letter from the Mackenzie. The Council District Mackenzie, and I felt that all things considered with COVID-19, there's a lot more people that are having to stay at home, and they may feel. I just feel it's a very important resolution to take forward to the federal government and French government. A lot of people are struggling right now, even with the pandemic hopefully coming to a close. I feel this is an easier way for them to access some help they may need. Sometimes if you can just pick up the phone and get on the line with somebody, it's a huge help to saving somebody's life. Considering our emergency rooms are a safe place to go for people if they feel they need help. that is more difficult during this, has been more difficult during this pandemic. And I would seek council support to send a letter of support as per the resolution at the bottom of the letter.
Thank you, Councillor Zant. So I would definitely agree with the importance and the value of a 3-digit suicide prevention hotline. I think that's a great idea. If I read it correctly, it's being presented as a resolution to UBCM. So I believe that's something that we would support more on the floor at the convention, Councillor Zant, rather than writing a letter of support, unless I read that wrong. This is in the form of a UBCM resolution, is it not?
No, this is actually a letter that their council has sent to the local member of parliament. It's actually at the federal level. So what they're doing is sending a resolution to the federal government seeking their support to adopt this program.
So, Councillor Zant, what you'd like to see is a similar letter from us to go to our MP?
That is correct.
To our member of parliament. So you could use a similar wording of that resolution and send it to our local MP, as well as the Federal Minister of Health, CRTC.
Right. Okay.
Yes, that was the motion of it.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Noble, further discussion? Any opposed? Oh, go ahead, Councillor Antonelli. Was that that was a second?
I was just seconding.
Okay, you're still that half a second behind the delay. Thank you. I will call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, down the home stretch, decision on late business. We have no late business. Notice of motion. Question period. For those in attendance who wish to ask questions, please click on the raise hand feature in the webinar controls. This will notify village staff that you would like to ask a question, and staff will unmute your microphone when it's your turn to speak. Please be reminded that only questions directly related to items discussed during this meeting are permitted. Ms. Kennedy, any questions?
There are no questions.
All right. Well, if that's the case, then I would like to recess the regular meeting and go back to get a motion to go back in camera, please.
Motion to go back in camera.
And so Noble, seconded by Councillor Zant. Any opposed? Motion carries. Give staff a chance to reset.
Okay.
And then I will reopen the regular meeting and look for a motion to adjourn tonight's regular council meeting.
Motion to adjourn.
Seconded by Councillor Antonelli. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, everyone. I thought that was a pretty good day.
Thank you.
Good day. So have a great night.
Have a
Good
great
night.
night.
Good night,
Good night,
everybody.
everybody.